Good afternoon. It's been a day of surprises for many South Africans. First, government announced that Eskom's national state of disaster is no longer in place. And then, in Parliament, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana decided to withdraw Eskom's exemption from reporting on irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Well, the withdrawal is not final, though, even though there has been a massive public outcry. National Treasury says this is a temporary withdrawal to allow for a period of further engagement and written technical input from all relevant stakeholders on the matter. I'm joined now by the Minister of Finance, Minister Godongwana. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Minister, just 5 days after gazetting that exemption, you have decided to pull the plug temporarily. Eskom requested this exemption, but please explain why it was necessary in the first place.
Let me just take you just a step back and say, if you look at the regulatory framework for state-owned enterprises and development finance institutions, it's the reporting requirements are very onerous and sometimes make it difficult for them to be agile. I have on my desk a request by all of them, including IDC, DBSA, and so on. Because what they report in terms of international financial reporting standards. They also report in terms of the JAC listing. In addition to that, they've got an additional requirement which is called fruitless and wasteful expenditure and so on, which is something unique to the public sector institutions. And therefore, there has been a request to kind of change that reporting format, and it has its implications on the financial accounting of these institutions. We did this for Transnet last year, and when Eskom made a similar request, we applied our minds to achieve two objectives in this instance, because Eskom tend to be unique in the sense that it's at the moment too topical about corruption. So we wanted to achieve two objectives at the same time. The first one was how do we achieve this financial accounting which is suitable for an institution such as Eskom, but at the same time ensure accountability and transparency. And then we kind of put up two pillars in this regard. The first one was to say some of those issues which has constitute no loss to the institution, but may be characterized as wasteful expenditure, must be reported not on the annual financial statement, but on the annual report. In that sense, you achieve two objectives. You are removing them from the annual financial statement. You are reporting them and transparency in the annual report. In that sense, you would ensure that there's accountability. That's the main objective. However, subsequent to that, in dealing with the Transnet situation, we had an intensive interaction with the Office of the Auditor General, as something which was in these particular circumstances, we didn't have much that interaction with the Office of the Auditor General. And particularly because of Eskom's complexity, in our discussion with the Auditor General, we felt that we needed some more second bite with them and more detailed discussion. And secondly, there has been, justifiably so, a comment by the public, worries about, concerns about hiding corruption. And it's not our intention to hide corruption. What we need to also do as part of that consultative process is how do we tighten the screws in such a manner that there will be no perception of trying to hide corrupt activities.
Minister, clearly those perceptions are still there, and your reassurances have not worked at all. Clearly the public does not trust what is happening at Eskom because we're looking at the national state of disaster being imposed there. When it comes to that, the public, a lot of people in the public, civil rights organizations, unions and business lobby groups said this is another feeding trough. Used words that were used by the former CEO Andre Darreter. So do you realize that there is a trust deficit between the government and what is happening at Eskom and what we are being told?
There's definitely a trust deficit around Eskom. And that explains why there's such a response by the public. It's precisely because of that trust deficit. There's no doubt about that. The question you're not going to, trust is not something that is proclaimed, it's something that is going to be earned. So it's going to take time for Eskom to earn that trust from the public, precisely because of previous misconduct. That I understand and I appreciate.
Let's talk about the temporary withdrawal. Clearly, what you told the joint committees in Parliament today is that this is a temporary withdrawal, and you seem like you still feel this is necessary, although there has been widespread criticism of the way government has gone about doing this. You still feel this is necessary, and in future, after those consultations, it will likely come back?
I still do believe that it is necessary. What the public is worried about, which is, in my view, is legitimate, is how is government handling the corrupt activities in Eskom? And therefore, that kind of worry by the public clouds the necessity of what we're trying to achieve. That is why we appreciate that. That's why we're taking this step, in order to take a consultative process and hear comments. And as a result, in the Gazette tomorrow, we will withdraw the current Gazette and also extend an invitation to the public for comment and how do we tighten the screws around the corruption part of this thing by the 21st of April this month.
Minister, one thing that you told the Parliament joint committees is that Eskom is not going to be needing any loan or any finance support of any kind. National Treasury has taken care of that. They won't need it for the next 3 years. Since you appeared this morning, there have been questions as to why then was there such a need for this particular exemption on a PFMA, and whether when it does come back later, it should look vastly different to what it was when it was gazetted on Friday.
Let me say two things about Eskom. That the first thing you have is that we have said in our debt relief package that Eskom should not go to the markets for new and do borrowing, unless with express permission of the Minister of Finance for defined purposes. That's the first thing. But the second thing, Eskom, as we speak, has a debt of approximately close to 400 billion rand. 350 billion of that is guaranteed by the state, which poses a risk to the fiscus if not properly serviced. Now, I'm raising that because it's quite important that any attempt to on or default on the part of Eskom or any perception by the current lenders of Eskom may have serious implications on the current stock of debt, and which may come back to the fiscus, as I've indicated, 350 billion of that still as guaranteed by the state. By the way, some of the institutions have already penciled it as part of our debt. The IMF has done that. Moody's have done that. So we've got to be careful how those financials are reported so that we don't have that comeback.
Minister, I know that we have run out of time. I have one last question on the search for the new CEO. I know there's an acting CEO at Eskom in the man that is Khalib Kasim. You are the Minister of Finance responsible for that particular entity. How is the search going? And that's one. And I was going to also ask your feelings about some who have called within the union federations and the business lobby group for an Eskom commission of inquiry into corruption, something that would be different, vastly different to the state capture commission of inquiry. Would you support that in order to deal with all the perceptions and reality of corruption that has been perceived at the power utility?
I mean, I'm not responsible for Eskom's operational activities. The Minister of Public Enterprises has got the line function responsibilities for Eskom. So as to what the process is for the CEO and so on, that is his responsibility. My worry, though, is that the absence of leadership in Eskom has got a direct bearing on the risks of Eskom, and therefore, from a financial perspective, we are worried because there's still a risk in the absence of a solid leadership with Eskom. As to a commission of inquiry, I'm not sure what further purpose it will serve, because if you look at the State Capture Commission, it provided a detailed submission and report on Eskom. What is needed is not a further investigation, but effectiveness in the giving effect to those recommendations.
Minister Enoch Godongwana, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. The Minister talking to us there some more about his appearance at the joint committees of Parliament on the withdrawal of the exemption of Eskom from reporting on irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, something that has got South Africa united in criticism to actually make sure that it does not come back at the power utility.